So we already saw that the emissions historically have been dominated by the rich countries, North America and Europe, and impacts are not even that the poor countries are disproportionately experiencing the impacts of the global warming caused by these emissions from the rich countries, and top 10% of the population emits 90% of the luxury good consumption emissions, and so on and so forth. The question then directly to ask is, do we have a moral responsibility to stop global temperature rise? The relevance of ethics to climate change discussion. So maybe here it's good to think about ethics and morality. Ethics, this is I've taken from a reference that is in the book. Okay, so I forgot to add it here, but ethics is two things. First, ethics refers to well-founded standards of right and wrong that prescribe what humans ought to do, usually in terms of rights, obligations, benefits to society, fairness, or specific virtues. Ethics, for example, refers to those standards that impose the reasonable obligations to refrain from rape, stealing, murder, assault, slander, and fraud. Ethical standards also include those that enjoin virtues of honesty, compassion, and loyalty, and ethical standards include standards relating to rights such as the right to life, right to freedom from injury, the right to privacy. Such standards are adequate standards of ethics because they are supported by consistent and well-founded reasons. Secondly, ethics refers to the study and development of one's ethical standards. As mentioned above, feelings, laws, and social norms can deviate from what's ethical. So it is necessary to constantly examine one's standards to ensure that they are reasonable and well-founded. Ethics also means then the continuous effort of studying our own moral beliefs and our own moral conduct, and striving to ensure that we and the institutions we help to shape live up to standards that are reasonable and solidly based. So ethics are the set of rules that are set up. So for example, it's unethical to kill somebody, or to plagiarize, to whatever, right? But morals tend to be more guiding principles, which depend on often religion, culture, region, practices, etc. So there is slight difference, but they are almost the same still. The book kind of refers to the irresponsible behavior of corporations, for example, in the context of their role in causing emissions and climate change, and how they are not taking up the responsibility for it, or doing enough to curb emissions, to make up for the damage caused, etc. So then it links to the qualities of a sociopath. So this is that website profile of the sociopath. I won't read it, but I find it a little bit excessive to say corporations are being sociopathic, because corporations are not individuals. They're owned by people. People buy shares, or they're owned by individuals in some cases, and people make money out of them. So it's probably not always a good thing to separate politicians and corporations into one bin and us as separate, because I think we are all in this together. So I will not go through these sociopath things. But coming to what drives decisions on these things like global warming, the first thing to note is that it is about shared resources, even though we refer to them as ecosystem services and common goods and so on. The logic of practical decision has to be practical decision making has to be considered. The example from the chapter, the factual premise: if we do not act soon, anthropogenic environmental changes will bring serious harms to the future. Analytically, this is shown to be the case with projections and historical evidences of how warming affects our system, the Earth system. Ethical premise: we have a moral obligation to avert harms to the future so as to leave a world as rich in life and possibility as the world we inherited. So this is an ethical premise. So how do we actually get to this point? Through a control and command approach, as we saw in economics, or a market-based approach, or are we just going to depend on people's sense of ethics and morality to accomplish this? That's not always easy. The conclusion then in the logic of practical decision making is that therefore we have a moral obligation to act, and act now. Okay, great. There was a survey done, and the response from the survey said, do we have a moral obligation to take action to protect the future of a planet in peril? So that was the question, and the answers were yes, to protect the thriving of humankind, yes, for the sake of our children, yes, for the sake of the earth and all its lives, so the other species that are on the planet. And there are already books called The Sixth Extinction and Planet in Peril, the disaster, all sorts of alarmist titles as well, which is a separate discussion. Fourth one, yes, because the gifts of earth are freely given and we are called to gratitude and reciprocity. So the question then is, do poor people have a right to resources? Does Mother Nature have rights to be protected, or not to be harmed the way we are harming? Yes, because compassion requires us to reduce or prevent suffering. Who's suffering? Other fellow human beings, as well as other species, and also Mother Nature, if you want to expand your ethical horizons. Yes, because justice demands it. So environmental justice is another concept that I will touch on in the end. Yes, because our moral integrity requires us to do what we believe is right. So here again the ethical and moral guidance come into picture. So under the one, we must act to protect the thriving of humankind. This is a cartoon that I always liked as well. It says Climate Summit. The person here, a good person, is saying climate action can, let's say, give us energy independence, can preserve rainforests, bring about sustainability, green jobs, livable cities, renewables, clean water and air, healthy children, etc., etc. And there is somebody asking, what if it's a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? Okay, that's kind of funny, right? So we talked about opportunity cost. So if we take these actions, what is the opportunity cost? Is it that climate change is a hoax and we unnecessarily created all these good things? That's what a question that is coming here, meant as a sarcastic joke, but you get the sense that people who are denying climate change, are skeptical about it, or opposing climate action, are essentially opposing all these good things. Well, it's not always that simple. The upshot of this question is, if severe planetary change threatens to undermine the foundations of human thriving, and if human thriving is a fundamental value, then we have an obligation to avert the degradations that threaten us. Anyone who accepts the scientific evidence about the dangers of climate change and affirms the value of human life will not be able to sit on their hands. So the key word here is fundamental value. Who determines what is a fundamental value, right? This is always tricky. Obviously, it's not as obvious to everybody as one would assume. Especially in the US, there is always big battles between people who support climate action and who don't, but that is much more deep in terms of whether they believe in climate change or not, or whether they think government shouldn't be telling them what to do, or whether they think government shouldn't tax them for things they don't want, or government shouldn't tax them to spend it on common goods like air quality and water quality, and so on and so forth. So Depending on how the questions are posed, different value systems seem to emerge. So one has to be very careful about what we mean by a fundamental value. Just like morality and moral values, these depend on religion, on region, on cultures, and so on. So let's leave this here and then come back and continue with the idea of what are the reasons that people think climate action should be taken. What are the ethical standards which make us want to do something about climate change and global warming. Okay.